Westernspring Television. Ours it is.
Osun High Court sentences hotel owner Ramon Adedoyin and 2 others to death over murder of OAU master student Timothy Adegoke. President Bola Tinubu arrives presidential villa on first day of office. Shots fired at occupied EFCC Lagos office. And on the foreign scene, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to meet US President Joe Biden next week. Good evening, this is News at 7 on Westernspring Television. My name is Evelyn Ohiola. We begin with legal matters. An Osun State High Court in Osogbo has sentenced the owner of Hilton Hotel Ile-Ife, Ramon Adedoyin, and 2 others to death by hanging over the murder case of Timothy Adegoke, a master student of the Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife. Adegoke died in controversial circumstances at Hilton Hotel owned by Adedoyin in November 2021. Delivering the judgment, Chief Judge of Osun State, Justice Adepele Ojo, found Adedoyin, Adeniyi Aderogba, and Kazeem Oyetunde guilty of the charges against them and were sentenced to death by hanging. They were also sentenced to serve different years of jail terms for other offenses committed, such as conspiracy and unlawful interference with the deceased's body in an attempt to cover up the murder. Justice Ojo also said Adedoyin's decision not to enter the witness box meant he agreed to the murder charge pressed against him by the prosecution. The chief judge, however, discharged and acquitted 3 other defendants, Kunle Adebayo, Lawrence Oluwole, and Magdalene Chiefuna, of all charges against them. After the plea to temper justice with mercy by both the defense and prosecution counsel on behalf of the 7th defendant, Adedeji Adeshola, who was found guilty of altering records, Justice Ojo adjourned till tomorrow for her sentencing. As part of the judgment, Justice Ojo held that the Hilux vehicle, which was used by the accused persons to convey the body of Adegoke to where he was buried, as well as the hotel belonging to Adedoyin, should be forfeited to the state. She also held that late Adegoke's children's education be placed under sponsorship of Adedoyin's estate up to the completion of university education. The judge then declared wanted Adedoyin's son, Rahim Adedoyin, who was the managing director of the hotel and reportedly supervised the dumping of Adegoke's body in a shallow grave before it was recovered by the police.
In the case of the 1st, 3rd, and 5th defendants, they've been charged for conspiracy to commit murder and murder as well. But that of the 7th defendant, she was only convicted for altering records, and her sentencing had been further adjourned to tomorrow. But that of the 1st defendant, the 3rd defendant, and the 5th defendant, let me mention their names. The 1st defendant is Dr. Raymond Adedoyin, and he has been convicted for conspiracy to commit murder and murder, among other counts preferred against him. The 3rd defendant is Adeniyi Aderogba. He was the manager of the hotel. He was the one that admitted that himself, Rahim Adedoyin, who is now at large, the 5th defendant, evacuated the dead body of the late Timothy Adegoke from the hotel, from room 305 where he was lodged, and evacuated it and dumped him at Ede Road. They both admitted, and they were convicted for their various roles in the entire case. So the 5th defendant is Oyetunde Kazeem. He was also a money manager as well in the same hotel. So the 3 of them, including the 7th defendant, have been convicted for conspiracy to commit murder and murder.
The 2nd defendant and the 4th defendant was actually discharged and acquitted, of course, you know, and the 5th defendant was convicted.
What's the next plan?
Yeah, in line with the provisions of the law, we will consult with our clients and take the necessary steps.
In another development, the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal today resumed hearing on the petition filed by the People's Democratic Party (PDP), Labour Party (LP), Allied People's Movement (APM), against the victory of President Bola Tinubu. Former Minister of State for Employment Festus Keyamo was cited in court this morning for the first time since the presidential election petition court began sitting. Keyamo, a senior advocate of Nigeria and former spokesperson for Tinubu-Shettima Presidential Campaign Council, donned his legal robe for today's hearing in defense of President Bola Tinubu. The definite hearing kicked off today after the court consolidated all the petitions before it at the last adjourned date. The consolidation is for expeditious hearing since most of the grounds of the petitioners are similar. The court adjourned the hearing of the petition of the APM against the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC), APC, and others to June 2nd. In the meantime, the National Industrial Court has upheld the no work, no pay rule by the federal government in the suit filed against the Academic Staff Union of Universities (ASU). According to the court, the no work, no pay rule enforced by the federal government against members of ASU who went on strike last year is perfectly legal. In a judgment delivered by the president of the court, Justice Benedict Kanyep, the court held that it is within the right of the federal government to withhold salaries of workers who went back on industrial action. The court, however, held that it is a violation of university autonomy for the federal government to impose the Integrated Payroll and Personnel Information System (IPPIS) platform on members of ASU who reserve the right to determine how their salaries should be paid. The federal government had dragged ASU before the National Industrial Court over the demand of the union for the payment of their salaries from February 14 to October 7, 2022, when the strike was called off. In Kogi State, an aggrieved governorship aspirant of the All Progressives Congress APC, Abubakar Achimugo, has asked the Federal High Court Abuja to disqualify the APC candidate, Ahmed Ododo, from contesting the forthcoming governorship election in the state. In the suit, the plaintiff stated that Mr. Ododo was not eligible to contest the November 11, 2023 governorship poll for not resigning his employment with the Kogi State Public Service at least 30 days before taking part in the governorship primaries, which he won. Listed as first to fourth respondents in the suit are the APC, Ododo, the deputy governorship candidate, Salami Didat, and the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. During today's proceedings, the plaintiffs, through his counsel, Daniel Ebune, informed the court of an application dated and filed May 12, wherein it is seeking leave of the court to amend the originating summons. The request, which was not opposed by lawyers representing the first, second, and third defendants, was granted. Now, away from legal matters, President Bola Tinubu has arrived at the presidential villa on his first day of work, hours after he took the oath of office as Nigeria's 16th president. Tinubu, who arrived at the Defense House, was welcomed by the Vice President, Kashim Shettima, the Speaker of House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Godwin Emefiele, amongst other dignitaries. Arriving at the villa, Tinubu first received a salutation from the quarter guard through the presidential gate. He thereafter exchanged pleasantries with Shettima, Gbajabiamila, and others.
Oh, bro, come on.
Meanwhile, the former governor of Kano, Abdullahi Ganduje, has disclosed that he is not seeking any appointment under the administration of President Bola Tinubu, who was sworn in yesterday. He stated this in an interview published by BBC Hausa today. Ganduje, who wishes Tinubu success, however, said if he is offered any appointment, he would take it. The former governor also disclosed he did not attend yesterday's inauguration ceremony of Abba Yusuf because he wanted to prevent their supporters from clashing during the event. In the meantime, the chief whip of the Senate, Senator Aji Kalu, has insisted that he will not step down for anyone in the race for the office of the Senate president. Kalu had made his intention clear about becoming the leader of the Senate a few months ago. Speaking to journalists at the National Assembly today, Senator Kalu says talks are at an advanced stage between himself and former Zamfara State Governor Abdulaziz Yari to contest the 10th Senate presidency on a joint ticket, and the outcome of their meetings would be unveiled soon. The ex-Abia governor reinstated that it was his turn to become the Senate president, adding that if elected as Senate president, he will be Team Nigeria. The National Working Committee of the All Progressives Congress, APC, had announced Senator Godswill Akpabio and Senator Jibrin Barau as the party's preferred candidates for the office of the Senate president and deputy, respectively. Moving on, shots were fired within the barricaded premises of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, number 15 Awolowo Road, Ikoyi, Lagos office, taken over by the Department of State Services, DSS. The shots, which appeared to have been fired in the air as a warning, came as journalists approached the locked gate of the premises to get close-up video shots. Police officers attached to the EFCC and other members of staff expressed shock at the development. Sources say there has been a 20-year silent dispute between both agencies over ownership and usage of the premises, and efforts to resolve the same have largely remained unsuccessful. The premises, which were originally exclusively used by the DSS, has been shared by both agencies since the establishment of the EFCC by former President Olusegun Obasanjo in 2003.
Shoot person.
Still in Lagos State, Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu has said it was unfair for marketers to hoard petrol following the announcement of fuel subsidy removal. Yesterday, President Bola Tinubu, in his inaugural speech, announced that fuel subsidy was gone and that it could no longer be justified. Less than an hour after his announcement, serious queues returned to filling stations across the nation as marketers hoard the product and sell at exorbitant prices. Reacting to this today during a tour of some ministries, a day after he was sworn in for a second term, Sanwo-Olu said it was too early in the day for people to second-guess the president. He stated that it was unfair on all major marketers to want to begin to seize the opportunity, noting that everyone needs to be sincere in the country.
Falls on queues. I think it's too early in the day for people to begin to second guess our new president. You know, this is a pronouncement, and I think it's unfair on all of our, major marketers who want to begin, to seize, opportunity in areas where it's not. I mean, we all need to be sincere in this country. If we really want to get things done, let us know that yes, we might need to belt up a little bit, but it's really so that we have a better life down the line. There's nothing that has changed in our pronouncement that to have caused, But hey, I'm sure the federal government that we have will be able to rise up to it and be able to deal with it. So I want to encourage everyone to be law-abiding, to go about their normal business, and things will certainly turn out for us for the better. Thank you.
Elsewhere, the House of Representatives has approved the sum of 255 million naira appropriated for the National Assembly e-Library in the Appropriation Act 2022-2023, be wired to the recurrent account of the National Assembly Library Trust Fund as part of the initial takeoff grant. The House also approved 118 million naira appropriated for the National Assembly dashboard and the federal government's budget be wired to the recurrent account of the NAS Library Trust Fund. The approval was equal to the unanimous adoption of a motion of urgent public importance moved by a member of the House, Jonathan Gbefui, at today's plenary. Mr. Gbefui noted that the National Assembly Library Trust Fund was established by the National Assembly Library Trust Fund Act 2022 for the provision of state-of-the-art library equipment and other related facilities. You're watching News at 7 on Westernspring Television. Still to come. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to meet US President Joe Biden next week. We'll bring you more on this when we return.
Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was an anti-apartheid activist who gave his all for the elimination of what has been described as the world's most vicious rule of the unjust and man's inhumanity against man. He was born July 18, 1918 in Mvezo, South Africa. Educated and trained as a successful legal practitioner, he took up the gauntlet of a human activist against segregation by the minority white suprematists in South Africa. At the climax of his trial for treason, orchestrated by the minority South African government, the great crusader for democratic equality was prepared to pay the supreme sacrifice to establish majority rule in his native land. He told white jurists that if achieving freedom for his people was worth his life, he was prepared to die. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in Robben Island, described as the most notorious prison in the world. It was from this same prison that he came out as a free man to assume office as South Africa's first black president in 1994. Westernspring Television identifies Nelson Mandela as a watershed character in history. The Korean War of 1950 to 1953 pitched North and South Korea against each other in response to intrigues by nations beyond their border with different interests from those canvassed by the two brother nations. The Korean War had all the nuances of an external conflict induced by powers that were interested in subjugating North and South Korea. Japan had leveraged on its military power to annex Korea in 1900 and imposed a military union that did not sit well with the citizens. Japan not only lost its war of conquest against Korea, all its powers were obliterated by the effect of the World War II. The end of World War II got Korea divided into two nations along 38 parallel lines by the instrumentality of the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. The Korean War lapsed into a Cold War when it stopped the prying eyes of external forces into the internal affairs of a nation now divided along its north and southern territories. Westernspring Television identifies the Korean War as a major event in history.
You're welcome back. This is still News at 7 on Westernspring Television. Osun State High Court sentences hotel owner Ramon Adedoyan and two others to death over murder of OAU master's student Timothy Adegoke. Tinubu arrives presidential villa on first day of office. Shots fired at occupied EFCC Lagos office. And on the foreign scene, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to meet US President Joe Biden next week. These are some of our headlines for today's news. But moving to security, the police authorities in Oyo have raided the residence of the sacked chairman of Park Management System PMS, Mukaila Lamidi, popularly known as Auxiliary. It was gathered that policemen stormed Auxiliary's Ibadan residence, recovering weapons and ammunition. During the operation, Auxiliary reportedly escaped. Some of his lieutenants were, however, arrested by the police. There was palpable tension in some parts of the state after the raid, especially in major car parks and garages in Ibadan, the state capital. The Oyo State Police Command confirmed the development in a statement today, noting that besides the arms recovered from them, 724 cartridges, assorted charms, 33 mobile phones, and a cash sum of 3.4 million naira were also recovered. Spokesman for the command, Osifeso Adewale, said 78 suspected hoodlums who had perfected plans to unleash mayhem at the early hours of today at major parts of the metropolis were also arrested. Elsewhere, the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, NDLEA, has arrested 2 members of a syndicate involved in the illicit importation and trafficking of fentanyl in Anambra State. NDLEA spokesperson Femi Babafemi, in a statement today, said the suspects' arrests came on the heels of an alert issued by the agency in November 2022 that some criminal elements were plotting to flood the Nigerian market with the drug. Mr. Babafemi noted that the 2 members of the syndicate, Odo Ogwejiofo and Chigozie Uzama, were arrested at Ogbogu Market, Onitsha, Head Bridge, Onitsha South local government area of Anambra State. The Anti-Narcotics Agency revealed that the drug, lethal syndicate opioid, is 100 times stronger than tramadol and is capable of causing mass casualty among the youth population being targeted by the cartels. On the foreign scene, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will meet US President Joe Biden in Washington next week for talks. Downing Street confirmed the meeting today. Mr. Biden invited Mr. Sunak to the White House when the British leader was in San Diego in March for the launch of a nuclear submarine deal with Australia. Next week's meeting will build on talks the pair have had about closer cooperation on economic challenges such as supply chain security and net zero transition. Mr. Sunak's official spokesman told reporters in London it will also give the 2 leaders an opportunity to discuss issues, including sustaining support for Ukraine. Now to the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia has accused Ukraine of launching an early morning drone attack on Moscow, the first time the city has been targeted by multiple drones since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Defense Ministry said Kyiv staged a terrorist attack with at least 8 drones, causing minor damage, while President Vladimir Putin said the drone attack was aimed at civilian targets. Ukraine has denied the attack.
Russia has accused Ukraine of launching a series of early morning drone attacks on Moscow, the first time the city has been targeted by multiple drones since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Russian capital and its surrounding areas were targeted by rare drone attacks on Tuesday morning, causing minor damage to buildings and no casualties, Moscow's mayor Sergei Sobyanin says. The Russian Defense Ministry said that Kyiv had staged a terrorist attack using at least 8 drones, while officials said that minor damage had been caused to several buildings. Since Russia sent troops into Ukraine in February last year, the war has largely been fought inside Ukraine, though Moscow has reported some attacks on its territory and said one was an assassination attempt against President Vladimir Putin. Wagner Group founder Yevgeny Prigozhin blamed the drone attack on Moscow on senior military officials living in Moscow's exclusive Rublyovka suburb. Ukraine has denied carrying out the drone strikes. Presidential aide Mikhailo Podolyak said that Kyiv was not directly involved in the Moscow attacks, but that Ukraine had enjoyed watching events unfold and predicted an increase in attacks. With Russian troops occupying some eastern Ukrainian regions, the war has killed tens of thousands, uprooted millions, reduced cities to ruins, and caused havoc in the global economy. Temitakpe Ajijalaluola, Westernspring Television News.
South Africa's foreign minister has granted diplomatic immunity to foreign officials attending the BRICS summit in August and a meeting for BRICS foreign ministers this coming week. The BRICS alliance represents some of the world's leading emerging economies, including Russia, China, Brazil, and India. Local media has said this could potentially open the door for Russian President Vladimir Putin to attend the August gathering in South Africa. The The International Criminal Court, ICC, issued an arrest warrant in March for the Russian president for alleged war crimes in Ukraine. As a signatory to the ICC's Rome Statute, South Africa is expected to enforce the warrant and arrest Mr. Putin. Both South Africa's spokesperson for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Clayson Moniela, tweeted that such immunities were standard when a country hosted an international conference or summit. Elsewhere in Europe, NATO has condemned as totally unacceptable attacks by demonstrators in Kosovo that left at least 30 of its peacekeepers injured. Police and NATO troops clashed with Serb protesters in the north, where there has been unrest over the installation of ethnic Albanian mayors. Tear gas and stun grenades were used to deter protesters in Zvecan after they tried to invade a government building. NATO soldiers also formed a security cordon around two other town halls. The crisis dates back to April when Kosovo Serbs boycotted local elections, allowing ethnic Albanians to take control of local councils with a turnout of less than 4%. Both the EU and the US have criticized the Kosovan authorities for destabilizing the situation in North Kosovo and warned against any actions that could inflame ethnic tensions there. Kosovo declared independence from Serbia in February 2008 after years of strained relations between its Serb and mainly Albanian inhabitants. In Africa, fighting flared again in Sudan today despite the latest ceasefire pledges of the two warring generals meant to allow desperately needed aid to reach besieged civilians. United States and Saudi mediators announced late yesterday that the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces had agreed to extend by 5 days the humanitarian truce they frequently violated over the past week. Since the extension announcement, residents reported clashes with various kinds of weapons in southern Khartoum and fighting in Nyala, South Darfur's state capital. The mediators admitted the truce had been imperfectly observed, but said the extension will permit further humanitarian efforts. The war has killed more than 1,800 people, according to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. The United Nations said more than 1 million have been internally displaced and nearly 350,000 others have escaped to other countries. Still ahead, House of Representatives backs President Bola Tinubu's decision to remove fuel subsidy. We have more on this and other business stories after this break. Please stay with us.
Mao Zedong at birth, but globally known as Mao Zedong, he was a Chinese revolutionary and founder, People's Republic of China, which he led as chairman of the Chinese Communist Party from 1949 until his death in 1976. He was a communist who believed in the attainment of power by the instrumentality of gun. His wise saying, "Political power grows out of the barrel of gun," formed the major plank of its revolutionary struggle for the control of China. In the long span of his leadership and political power, Mao Zedong relentlessly entrenched the communist philosophy in China, which emphasized the revolutionary struggle of the vast majority of people against the exploiting class and their state structures. The communist leaders defined the class struggle as people's war. Mao Zedong was a story of grass to grace, having risen from peasantry to preeminent status as China's most respected leader. Westernspring Television identifies Mao Zedong as a major character in history. The British Empire was the largest and the most powerful in the world. At its zenith, the empire embraced a quarter of the Earth's land surface and imposed her imperial majesty's rule on more than 458 million peoples across nations and continents. The empire took off with overseas possessions and trading posts established by England, spread over 3 million kilometers between 16th and early 18th century. Like previous previous empires, the British Empire began to crumble on its weight of overstretched territories and growing unrest in our various colonies. Today, the British Empire no longer exists. What is in place is the Commonwealth of Nations, a loose association of sovereign states which recognize the King of England as the titular head. Westernspring Television identifies the British Empire as a watershed empire in history. Born Jeremiah Oyeni Obafemi on March 6, 1905, Obafemi Awolowo was a prime architect of Nigeria's independence and most consummate advocate of free education and social welfare in Africa's most populous nation. Erudite politician, thinker, and philosopher, Awo was fondly addressed by associates and political colleagues, brought his unique attributes to bear on governance in the defunct Western region. He administered as leader of government business and the premier between 1955 and 1958. Obafemi Awolowo's premiership witnessed pioneering in multi-sectoral policy initiatives and execution. The Western region under his administration paraded several enviable records. First television station in Africa, first real estate in Nigeria, first high-rise building in Nigeria, first modern sports stadium in Nigeria, first agricultural settlement in Nigeria, first modern civil service secretariat in Nigeria, and first industrial estate in Nigeria. His face is on 100 naira denomination as a mark of honor for his distinguished services to his country. Westernspring Television identifies Obafemi Awolowo as a major character in history.
Welcome back. Now we move straight to business. The House of Representatives has commended President Bola Tinubu for his decision to remove subsidy on premium motor spirit, popularly known as petrol. The commendation was a sequel to the unanimous adoption of a motion of urgent public importance moved by a member of the House, Jimo Olajide, APC Lagos, at today's plenary. Tinubu had in his inaugural address yesterday hinted at petrol subsidy removal by his administration. Moving the motion, Olajide said the president was a concerned senior citizen whose agenda was to favor the downtrodden for the purpose of humanity. Meanwhile, the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria, TUC, has said that President Bola Tinubu cannot solely take the decision to remove subsidy payment on petroleum products in the country. The TUC called on the newly inaugurated president to tarry a while to give room for robust dialogue and consultation, as well as stakeholders' engagement before making any decision on the delegate matter. The Congress, in a statement co-signed by its president Festus Osifo and Secretary General Nuhu Toro, said there were a host of issues that need to be amicably considered and resolved before such a decision can be taken. The TUC stated that the Nigerian workers and indeed masses must not be made to suffer the inefficiency of successive governments. Less than 24 hours after President Bola Tinubu said the payment of fuel subsidy has ended, lengthy queues have started resurfacing in filling stations across Nigeria. However, in a statement on Tuesday, the president clarified that he meant the end of June and that panic buying was needless as the policy will not take immediate effect. Meanwhile, the Trade Union Congress and the Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria, IPMAN, has frowned against the subsidy removal. Toby Sanusi visited some filling stations in Osun State and now reports.
Just after Nigerians had thought the struggle for fuel had ended, a new normal resurfaced in filling stations. In his inaugural speech on Monday, President Bola Tinubu said an end has come to subsidy on fuel, but Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria, IPMAN, treated these new developments with rejection as many filling stations were closed down today, while others sell a litre of fuel between 270 and 350 naira. Antonia Oyedemi and Oladapo Okunla, who both faulted the pronouncements made by President Tinubu on fuel subsidy removal, could tell what it feels like after queuing for fuel for several hours under scorching sun. They, among others, were stuck at filling station and could not go about their businesses.
They shouldn't have announced subsidy removal yesterday. They should have settled in first, see what Dangote refinery has to offer us before they now implement this. Although we know that this is in the budget, we know it's not the fault of this present government, but they should have at least settled down, look at what they can do by adding value to the economy instead of adding more stress to us. Look at the way I'm sweating. I had to leave the office coming here to queue for fuel when I should be in the office doing my work.
I blame the government because if the government want to assist we that we are buying such fuel to use for such things, at least they're supposed to look after the people that doesn't have the strength and the power. Look at, there are elderly people now on the queue that they cannot make an inch. And when you look at this stand, you see people sitting down, there's no fuel to work. There are Okada people, taxi people that are supposed to work for their daily bread that doesn't have fuel to work.
The new development of subsidy removal was also accompanied by surge in transportation prices across board. Some commercial drivers like Ponle Abolade, Olanyo Najim, and Babatunde Olagunju, whose businesses have been hampered, described the independent marketers as extortioners.
I've been here since around 9 o'clock, about 3 or 4 hours now. They are selling it 280, 300. We are buying it for 200, even 199. They are selling it at the highest rate now. So it's the fault of the marketers.
Seriously, it's affecting because since morning now we have been here. We didn't do anything, so we are just stay here without doing anything. And the money is not coming in. It's when we are working that we will have something to show for.
Listen, pàtó tó ṣẹlẹ̀ bí a bí láti tó 4 hours. Ìṣèjú àwọn fi já epo níbí wọn ò dẹ̀ ta fún wa. Àti mọ iye price pàtó tí wọ́n ta fún wa báyìí àti wà ń bí ó ti lé 4 hours. Gbogbo àwa ọlọ́kọ̀ pàwátà àti oníkóró pátápátá kò jẹ́ ká rí iṣẹ́ ṣe látàárọ̀.
Before the end of his administration, former President Muhammadu Buhari had said fuel subsidy would be removed by the end of June 2023. But many Nigerians had not expected the news of fuel subsidy removal in the wake of presidential inauguration. The last time Nigerians experienced a wave of lengthy queues was during the crash crunch that was accompanied by fuel scarcity. Over the years, several attempts made by different government administrations to remove subsidy on fuel have been met with strong opposition, especially from labor unions. But President Tinubu reiterated that there is no provision of fuel subsidy in the budgets handed over to him, signaling that the removal is sacrosanct. Nigerians will expect an intervention from the administration of President Tinubu, as economic experts have over time maintained that the government must put in place palliative measures to cushion the effect of subsidy removal on Nigerians.
Nigerians woke up to a new normal today as long queues resurfaced across filling stations in Nigeria today. This follows the pronouncement of removal of fuel subsidy by President Bola Tinubu. Right behind me, you can see long queues of motorcycles and commercial buses. Some of them say they have not made a dime today owing to the fuel scarcity. Some of the private car owners also say they have not been able to go about their daily businesses. Well, however, blame the independent marketers for ordering fuel and in most cases selling at ridiculous prices. As of this morning, prices of transportations have soared. Toby Sanusi, Westernspring Television News. Now still talking oil prices outside Nigeria now. Oil prices fell by about 4% today as concerns about whether the U.S. Congress will pass the U.S. debt ceiling pact and mixed messages from major producers clouded the supply outlook ahead of the OPEC Plus meeting this weekend. Brent crude futures fell $3.09 to $73.98 a barrel by 15:03 GMT, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was down $2.84 from Friday's close to $69.83 a barrel. The House of Representatives Rule Committee is due to consider the 99-page bill by 3 p.m. local time ahead of votes in the Republican-controlled House and the Democratic-controlled Senate. The deadline nearly coincides with the June 4 meeting of OPEC Plus. The organization of the petroleum exporting countries, OPEC, and allies, including Russia, traders are uncertain about whether the group will increase output cuts as a slump in prices weigh on the market. The European Central Bank today warned that the Eurozone's top banks may take a hit if their financial clients, such as funds, insurance, and clearinghouses, withdraw their deposit or otherwise run into trouble. The ECB study looked into the risk of spillovers from so-called shadow banks, such as funds and other financial companies that provide funding in one form or another to traditional lenders and vice versa. It found the exposure both in terms of bank assets, such as loans, and liabilities, such as deposits, was concentrated in the Eurozone's top 13 lenders, including its 8 globally important banks. The biggest risk it identified was that shadow banks withdrew their funds from banks, such as deposits and repurchase agreements. These account for 13% of all traditional banks' liabilities or more for larger banks. This could happen if the shadow banks or non-bank financial intermediaries, in the regulator's jargon, were themselves hit by outflows or lost confidence in a bank. Now talking sports, Nigeria's Super Falcons will face either Ethiopia or Chad in the second round of the 2024 Paris Olympic football qualifiers. This was announced at the draw for the qualifiers, which was held in Cairo, Egypt. Ethiopia and Chad will face each other in the first round, and the winner over 2 legs will take on the Super Falcons in the second round. The African qualifiers will kick off in July 2023 and will be concluded in April 2024. Only 2 women's teams will represent Africa at the football event of the Paris Olympics. The Super Falcons have failed to qualify for the last 3 Olympic Games in 2012, 2016, 2020. Their last appearance at the football event at the Games was in 2008 in Beijing, where they crashed out in the group stage. In Italy, Juventus will pay a €718,000 fine as part of a settlement agreement with Italian football authorities over a case concerning payment of player salaries. Juventus were docked 10 points last week over a separate investigation into the club's past transfer dealings. The settlement means Juventus have accepted that 10-point penalty and will not receive a further points deduction. It brings an end to any ongoing cases involving the Turin club. As well as the overall fine of the club, the Italian Football Federation gave fines to several officials, including former Vice Chairman Pavel Nedved and ex-sporting director and managing director Fabio Paratici. In England, Luton Town captain Tom Lockyer remains in hospital after collapsing during the Championship playoff final at Wembley on Saturday. Lockyer collapsed after just 8 minutes of the game against Coventry and was taken straight to hospital. Manager Rob Edwards in an interview said the defender was okay, but still in the hospital as he is having lots of tests and checks. Despite losing their captain, Luton went on to beat Coventry on penalties. Despite being in hospital, Lockyer was pictured on Instagram celebrating the side's return to the top flight for the first time since 1992. Meanwhile, Wales manager Rob Page expects the defender to be back for the Welsh national team for their fixture in September.
Well, he was all right. He was great for the conversation. I was never in question. You're always going to phone your players and show them support, and that's what it was. It was just to say that we're here for him in any capacity, and he was okay. He was pleased with the season he's had, and rightly so. He's pleased with now being a part of it. It's an incredible story, and for that football club to get promoted to the Premiership in the manner in which they have done is incredible. And he was a massive part of that. I've seen some of the goals he scored, some of the set pieces, attacking the ball far post. It's Tom Lockyer, so I can see why he's climbing the walls and wanting to discharge himself. Because of how we went down, you do wonder what the reasons were, but it'll be silly of me to even suggest what those reasons were. So he's in good hands at the minute, and that's for Luton to make a statement with regards to what they're doing. But for us, it's just about him getting him fit and well and ready for our camp then in September.
And that's all we have for you at this hour. But before we go, here is a recap of our major stories. An Osun State High Court in Osogbo has sentenced the owner of Hilton Hotel Ile-Ife, Ramon Adedoyin, and 2 others to death by hanging over the murder case of Timothy Adegoke, a master's student of the Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife. President Bola Tinubu has arrived at the presidential villa on his first day of work, hours after he took the oath of office as Nigeria's 16th president. Shots were fired within the barricaded premises of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, number 15, Awolowo Road, Ikoyi, Lagos, office taken over by the Department of State Services, DSS. And on the foreign scene, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will meet US President Joe Biden in Washington next week for talks. Downing Street confirmed the meeting today. Please do follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Westernspring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Westernspring Television. I am Evelyn Ohiola. Thank you so much for your time.